I got this tablecloth off Marketplace and I'm going to turn it into a dress today. Hi, I have this seersucker cotton plaid material that I got off Marketplace, and I've had this idea for a while now and I want to turn it into a dress that's got like deep V, a center seam at the front and back, a bit more like form fitting up the top, and then it flows out from there. Keep it kind of like a mini style, and I think having the 4 panels will help us create that nice flowing effect outwards, and then either add some like puffy short sleeves or some situation up here. We'll see how it comes together and what ends up looking best, but that's the general vision. Let's see how we go with bringing that to life. If you also would like to follow along, this is what you'll need. You obviously need some material. I'll put the recommended amounts per size in the description box of this video. As I mentioned, this is quite like a lightweight seersucker cotton material. I feel like pretty much most woven materials will work well for this. I preferably would go for like a nice lightweight linen or cotton. So then once you've got your fabric, you'll then just need a reference shirt, as we'll be self-drafting this process and we'll be using that as a bit of a base to create the sizing and overall fit. And then you'll just need some matching thread for your material, some pins, a measuring tape, some fabric chalk, and then a trusty old sewing machine. Once we have all those essentials, it's then time to bring this dress to life. But before we do that, I just want to say a massive thank you to the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. So with the Skillshare membership, you can engage in your hobbies and passions for a full 12 months. It's the perfect way to start and finally keep your resolutions for the new year. I'm personally in my self-help era, so I've been really enjoying Ali Abdaal's Notion masterclass, all about maximizing productivity and organization. I'd love to have some new streamlined systems going into the new year so I can really get on top of my overflowing work, and these videos were the perfect starting point for that. If you're like me and don't want to add more stuff or clutter to your life this Black Friday, why not make the most of Skillshare's best value offer of the year and spend more time refining your passions and curiosities. For a limited time only, you can use my link in the description box to get 50% off of your Skillshare subscription. So make the most of this offer while you can to invest in yourself this holiday season. A massive thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and now time to jump back into the sewing tutorial. Also, if you would prefer to draw out a pattern before actually cutting and drawing onto the fabric, I'd recommend getting some butcher paper or something similar that we can add the measurements to and then reuse as a pattern piece moving forward for other projects. I don't always do this step, but I think when I have limited material, I find it a good process where I can kind of like pre-map it out here and then make sure I can place it out well on the material so I'm not wasting any of it and making the most of it. I've grabbed a shirt and it is not entirely fitted, but it's probably like crew neck style, so fitting nice and close up the top, which is going to help us indicate where our neck starts. And then also the sleeve pretty much starts exactly where my shoulder ends, which is what I want. So try and find a shirt that fits you well, not too oversized, not too tight, and that would be the perfect number that we can then base our measurements off. Grab your reference shirt, fold it in half so that you are focusing on the back side. I also tend to do it inside out just because it allows you to see where the actual seams are. Normally, to reduce paper waste, I would start on the very edge and work my way across, but we need to kind of angle it out. So I'm going to put the shirt in the center of this paper so that I can obviously angle out from there. So what I'll be tracing around is from the neck to the shoulder, the armhole, and then also the highest neck point, which is the back, which is what we are looking at. And when I am tracing around all these areas, I'm actually just tracing it exactly where it is, because I can then note on this paper to add the seam allowance and trace around it from there. And when I did remove the shirt, I actually ended up pushing the bottom of the armhole down by about an inch, just because I know that this top is quite tight fitting and I want the dress to be a little bit more looser around here. So that's a little note to you as well. If you know that this fits a little bit different how you want the dress to fit, I would recommend making any changes now, because then it will just be on paper. To figure out the dip of the V, obviously we have plotted out the back of the top. It's going to be the very highest point. So I'd recommend starting to measure from where your collarbones meet down to where you would like the V to finish. Now, if you're unsure, I would recommend making it a little bit higher than need be, because you can always cut it lower, whereas if you accidentally cut it too low, it's going to be a little bit harder to add extra height. So I went for my dip of 8 inches. So from the center neckline, I measured down 8 inches and pop a dot there, and then I will draw a line from the shoulder corner to that center point. When we go to cut this out, this comes down to personal preference. I like having the full closed-in section on the back. Otherwise, you can have the deep V on the front and the back and have it a mirrored look. Knowing that, that means I will trim out the full area of the back, and then I can just tuck away that V section when it comes to tracing around the front section. And then when it comes to finishing the rest of this and kind of turning this top area into a full dress, we will just grab our measuring tape and measure from the top of your shoulder down to where you would like the dress to finish. As I mentioned, I'm going for quite a mini look, so I went for about from my shoulder down to like my mid thighs, which for me was about 37 inches. I will measure from that shoulder section down to 37 inches point. And just to be safe, I'm going to add about 2 inches here, just because, you know, things can go wrong and it's better to have a little extra length if need be, even though I will be adding on seam allowance, just in case anything, I don't know, mismatches and you need to take it up a little bit. So for the full length, I ended up measuring 39 inches and drawing a line across that bottom section. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be cutting out 4 panels, so there'll be 2 on the front, 2 on the back. So to figure out the angle out from that center dot point, I'm going to pop a dot down the very bottom section in line with that. And same with the underarm point, I'm going to pop a dot down the very bottom in line with where the bottom of that armhole reaches. So these 2 dot points down the bottom create a straight line from the underarm and the center. But obviously our bodies are not a straight line and we need to adapt for that and also create a nice flowy finish. So this section comes down to personal preference. From these dots, I measured out 4 inches on each side. So it'll end up angling out 4 inches. So that means I'm adding 8 inches to every panel. So it will create quite a different flowy effect down the bottom. If you don't want as much of a flow, you could add maybe, you know, 2 or 3 inches. If you want it to be quite excessive, then obviously you can add more than 4 inches. Again, if you add more, you can always take it in. So once you're happy with that extra width you've added, just draw a line from those outer bottom points to the center front and also the underarm section, and that should be our pattern all ready to go. I'm happy with how that is all looking. I'm going to grab my paper scissors and cut that all out. This is what we ended up with. Like I mentioned, I can fold that in for the front pieces and then also have it out when I'm doing the full back piece. I just kind of like held it up against me and made sure it's kind of looking how I want it to. Like when the top of the shoulder is sitting where it's meant to, is the armhole like sitting nicely? Again with the V, is it like nice and center? If it's like over too far, it might end up being a little bit too loose, so just make any adjustments if need be. I guess I start cutting. There's a lot of fabric, so I'm going to lay it down here and cut it out. I just have one dilemma. She was an old tablecloth, so she's got a few holes in her, don't we all? So we're just going to have to work around that. That's why it's good to have the paper pattern piece, because now I can kind of like block it out on here, trace around it, and then play around from there. Two mirroring front pieces, 2 mirroring back pieces, and I think I Tetrised well enough, so I've got enough for sleeves. I'm going to be limited for length, I think, but I think I've got enough to make it nice and puffy. So that's fun. Pop that aside, and now it's time to start assembling it. There is a hole in the bottom of one of the front sections. Hopefully that gets like hidden in the bottom hem, or I might have to like patchwork it up. We'll figure it out. And I'm going to focus on the back pieces first. We're going to join that center seam together. So you'll notice there's the curved neckline, and then we'll just sew entirely down the length of this center seam on the back. Again, making sure that the good sides are facing. And that is that, simply done. And for the front side, same thing, we will lay them good sides facing. We will also focus on that front center seam. But when we do sew it, I recommend starting from the bottom and working your way up, and stopping about 1 inch from that point where it starts to angle up for this front V section. And the reason we stop that 1 inch away is so it allows room that we can create a double fold for the hems of these center sections. Sitting in your room, working on my first record. Skip to the present, and I still haven't released it. But it's okay, 'cause the new songs are way better. That's what it feels like. That means we should have 1 full front panel, one full back panel, and it's time to now start assembling that. But I'm going to give you a little choice on how you'd like to finish this. Now, like I mentioned, we need to create a double folded hem around this front V section and as well as the back neckline. Now you can wait to do that once this has started to join up and do it all in one go. So you do the front V up to the neckline around and then back to the front again. Obviously that creates one nice clean line, but for some reason I'm feeling compelled to do them separately and then kind of join them up. I just feel like it would be nice to focus on getting that nailed and then get the neckline looking good as well. And then when it comes time to joining it, I'll just align it from those points. Comes down to personal preference. So I'm just going to create a double fold along that front V section, and each fold is going to be about 1 centimeter or half an inch. Once I've pinned that in place, I then jump on the machine and sew down one side of the V, turn the corner, and then work my way back up the other side. And then I have a nice clean front finish like that. I'm just going to do the same to the neckline of the back section. I just feel like if you're doing it all in one go, it just might get a bit much trying to work with the curved line and then going down into the deep V. Now the front neckline and the back neckline are looking all clean. I've just laid the back side with the good side facing up, and then I'm laying the front side with the good sides facing down onto that. And if you're like me and the shoulder sections happen to be a different width, I would recommend just lining it up all at the neckline, and then any extra excess fabric can just be trimmed off from either front or back side. And then once that's all lined up, I'm just going to sew across the shoulder edges and entirely down the 2 side edges from the bottom of the armholes, and obviously leaving the armhole completely open. And then we can do a little try on and see how it's all fitting. This is my constant dilemma. I get too scared of making something too small, and then I end up making it like way too big. So as you can see, it's very oversized. Not very, but it's like a little bit. But I am liking the flowiness of it. See, by having the 4 different panels and having each of them go outwards, it kind of gives it like, what's it called, like a circle cut effect. So some like solutions here. Obviously if the dip is a little bit too low, which potentially I'm thinking it is, I've got a bikini on and it's like showing that bottom line there. I'm just going to turn it back so it's facing good sides at that point, and literally just sew that seam up a little bit higher. So it starts there, and then I'll just meet back to the existing point of the seam, probably like there-ish. Apart from that, I like it. Like I mentioned, I did add quite a bit of length, and I think you can see that. I do want it to end up being like mid-thigh, so I'll probably end up having to take a bit off. I've noticed that like outwardness we've added to each panel, it kind of gives it a bit of like angled effects. I don't know, when you put it on, it kind of comes to points at the seams, so I'll end up having to like lay it out, draw a line and make it all nice and straight, which means I'll lose a bit of length there, which works to my benefit, and then I'll be able to hem it and it will finish where I want it to. But I'm gonna worry about the length as like the last step once it's all together, and I can like suss it out then. I'm gonna finish this, just move it up literally by like an inch. I think that'll help it sit nice, and then I'm gonna focus on the sleeves. Also, I just realized that I totally forgot to mention that if at this stage if you're liking the kind of like sleeveless look, you can 100% just leave it and do a double folded hem around the edges of the armholes, and essentially you're done once you take up the length. And as well, I've seen dresses like this in that kind of like sleeveless style and full length, and I think that's really pretty, so that's something to think about as well. But even like doing each panel a different material, like you could do some prints that match with a nice color, and like it all is like mixed and matched but cute. And you could like add big pockets and stuff. I've trimmed down my remaining material to the most amount that I could feasibly cut out from what was left over. And I feel like it's gonna work out perfect. Key measurements for the sleeve to cut out the pieces is measure the height of your armhole and add 2 inches of seam allowance. Now, if you weren't doing a gathered effect, that would just be the full height that you would cut out on the fold. Because I'm going for a gathered effect, I would normally double that amount. So if mine was about, I think it was like 11 inches, I would double that to be 22 inches for the height. And then for the length of the sleeve, I'm limited to what I have left over. I think I have about 11 inches. Measure from your shoulder down to your ideal length. We'll need 1 inch for the top to create that gathered effect. So whatever the height that you found out it was, so mine for example was 22 inches. As we will be doing all this on the fold the fabric until it meets that height, and you'll end up cutting out a front and a back side. So find your sleeve height on the fold, and then for the length, obviously use that length that we just found. Draw out a rectangle with the fold along the top length, and then cut out 2 pieces, and that will be our sleeves that we're going to attach. I'm going to see how much I have left and work with that. So once I had cut out the full height of the sleeve on the fold and the designated length that we'd figured out, I then popped my dress armhole over the top, and because I'm going for that gathered look, I have got quite an oversized height, and the open edge is where we're going to align the bottom of the armhole. So once I had it there, I'd offset it by 1 inch from the bottom, and that's just going to allow a bit of extra seam allowance so that we can join up the sleeve section at the bottom. Then from there, I essentially just copied the curve of the armhole and continued down to that extra inch or so of seam allowance. Then I removed the dress, cut out this section, and then it was time to start gathering it up, ready to match it onto the armhole section. So I unfolded this whole sleeve section, and along this new curved edge, which we'll be attaching onto the dress, I then sewed one line entirely along here. And to do the gathered effect, I just recommend not back stitching at the beginning or the end, and also even increasing the stitch length and decreasing the tension, so that way it'll kind of keep the threads nice and loose and easier to pull it. So once I sewed one line entirely across this section, I then just separated the 2 threads on one end and began pulling the fabric over one of these threads, and I can kind of shuffle the gatheredness so it's evenly across this section. And I continued to do this gathering process until it matched the height of the armhole on the fold. And once it did reach that height, I then pushed the sleeve material, so majority of it is sitting on top of the dress. The raw gathered edge is then matching the edge of the armholes. I then unfolded the sleeve and began pinning this around the armhole section so that all the good sides of the dress and the good sides of the sleeve are facing, and all these raw edges are matching. The benefit of having the gathered effect means you can adjust how gathered it is or how much length you have until you get to the point where this sleeve covers the whole armhole section. Once that's pinned in place, we can then jump on the machine, start at the underarm section, sew entirely around this, joining the sleeve onto the dress, and that's the first section done. We'll then just flip the garment so it's facing entirely inside out, and then focus on closing the bottom section of this sleeve. So make sure that the good sides of the sleeves are facing, this raw bottom edge is all aligned, and then begin sewing from pretty much where we finished on the underarm section until the very edge of the sleeve. How's that afternoon, sun? This is how the first sleeve looks attached. Personally, I like the cinched in effect, so I'm going to add an elastic band down the bottom. But of course, you can always leave it open and have like a flowy puffy sleeve effect. Okay, I'm going to do that. Hi, so it's been a couple of days since I was filming the beginning part of this dress. Been to the beach this morning. We've got bikinis on, a button-up shirt, the hair is salty, and I'm probably going to go for a swim after I finish this, so I just want to talk you through the final steps. Now, if you're like me and you try it on and it is very oversized around this armhole section, I did find a way around this, and obviously when we sewed the bottom of that sleeve, we just did it parallel to the edge. I'm going to experiment with sewing from the armhole section up and angled towards the top of the sleeve, and that way it'll help get rid of the bulky oversized look, which maybe for longer sleeves might be fine, but for shorter sleeves I just found that doing the whole double height effect just left a lot of gapy material there, which I'm not particularly into. So like I mentioned, I just went back to my machine and I sewed a new line from the underarm section up to about 1/3 from the bottom of the sleeve, and that will just help remove the bulkiness from under here, as well as helping create less fabric to then gather in for the final finishing touch. So to finish off the sleeve, I'm actually going to end up adding some cuffs on the end. To do this, I just measured the width of my arm quite loosely as I want it to be not too fitted, and then add 1 inch of seam allowance. Then for the width of this material, Figure out how wide you would like it to be, double that, and then add 1 inch of seam allowance. I want mine to end up being about 1.5 inches, so if I double that, that's obviously 3 inches, and then add 1 inch, and that equals 4 inches. So that would be my cutting width and length. To prepare the cuff, we're just going to lay it good sides facing, matching up the short edges, and sewing across there. Then once we've done that, we can create one fold so that only the good sides are facing outwards. Then to prepare the end of the sleeves, we're just going to do the same thing that we did for the gathering effect, and that is sewing one line entirely around this edge, remembering not to backstitch on the beginning or the end, grabbing one of the threads and beginning to pull the fabric over it until it does gather up and reach the width of the cuff that we have created. So now we have the cuff prepared and we have the edge of the sleeve all gathered. It is time to join it up and essentially finish the top half of the dress. And to do that, we slide the cuff onto the sleeve so that the raw edges of the cuff and the raw edges of the sleeve are matching, and then just sew entirely around this area. Make sure you are hiding the stitch of the gathering within the seam allowance. Figure out how much you need to offset this new sewing line to do that. And that, my friends, is the sleeve. All done. If you're following along, you can go ahead and repeat that for the second sleeve, and then we're up to the final step. Okay, this is exactly what I was envisioning. It's so nice when you try it on and it works out how you want. Obviously, I need to do the other sleeves. You're repeating all the same steps for that over here. And then the last step is, while I'm trying this on now, I'm just gonna like mark out some points where I want it to be nice and straight for the bottom part. It kind of like dips at the corner bits. So I'm just gonna do a bit of like laying it out, trying to draw lines, maybe even pinning it up before I cut it just to make sure it's looking how I want to. Once I'm happy with how it's kind of looking, I will trim it straight, at least leave 1 inch of seam allowance, and then I'm going to do a double folded hem along that bottom edge, and I'm going to have a finished dress. I'm obsessed. Also, one last note, obviously I went back through and trimmed off any excess seam allowance. I zigzag stitched the edges to prevent it from fraying, so I would recommend either overlocking or zigzag stitching at each step, or if you're like me and you like to just kind of like do it all together once it's fitting how you want it to, then you can do that. I think I'm genuinely at the mercy of this dress for the rest of my life. I want it in every color. It's just fun. I need these things in my life where I can just like quickly throw it on, don't have to think about it, start up with different bags, different shoes. She's flowy. I was even playing around with like wearing jeans with it the other day, you know, layer it up for the warmer months, add a vest over the top. I love it. I think I really want a black version of this, or like a darker block color. Like that could be like a real like a fancy number you could dress up with a little bit of bling. But I think this was a very successful tablecloth to dress pipeline. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this dress come to life, and don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy it, or share it with a friend, as that helps this channel. And if you do happen to give it a go yourself, tag me at the Essentials Club and I'll check it out. Otherwise, I hope you have a lovely day wherever you are, and I'll see you guys in the upcoming videos. I'm just gonna frolic around in my new dress.
You in the backyard of your old farm in the summer. Stayed there for 3 weeks where we learned to love each other. Wrote you a letter.